on site. So if we can keep our soil on site, our topsoil, if we can keep all the different things, including even the lawn, and turn that to compost on site and not haul it off to the dump, you're way ahead of the game. As homeowners, if you are patient and persistent, you can change anything. As a contractor, sometimes we have to move very fast. And because we have a schedule to keep and we have workers to keep going, but you can use time. Time can be on your side in some of these instances. So first I'm going to tell you about a technique called soil solarization. Now, who here has ever used this technique using clear plastic or so a few people. And I haven't done this much, but we just did a large project in Menlo Park using this technique. So I took some pictures and I want to share with you what soil solarization is all about. So first of all, you need to do it when it's sunny. That means you can't do it in the shade and you can't do it in the winter. It has to be in the summer in the full sun. You need to take about 4 to 6 weeks to actually kill the grass or the areas that you're trying to kill. It will kill everything, and I mean everything, in the top 4 to 6 inches of the soil, and that means it does kill the beneficial fungi and bacteria. It kills weed seeds. It kills roots. The worms, I believe, can move, but anything that can't move will heat up very much. And to make this accomplished, because this is actually what you're trying to do, you want to moisten the soil. You want to, because water will help make it happen faster and better. You want to get rid of any air pockets or vegetation because you want the plastic to be laying right on the soil. So if it's real lumpy, you actually have to sort of level it so you don't get big air pockets. It'll be hottest at the surface, and gradually as it goes down, it will become less and less hot. It'll become cooler. And you need to tack or weight down the edges so that air doesn't come in and, and cool it. And so I have some pictures of what this would look like. So we did this big project in Menlo Park where our clients had purchased a new home and it had over 5,000 square feet of lawn. And that's not really where they were at. So we decided we were going to solarize this project so that they could do something different with the area. Well, first we had to weed whack it because we wanted to get this lawn down to soil. And this actually turned out to be a lot more work than I expected because the grass was like 3 inches thick, really, really bushy. And so we weed whacked it. You'll notice in this picture we have put pieces of plywood up against the windows. Yeah, there's a good reason for that. You can imagine that weed whacking becomes a lot more expensive when you break a $1,000 window. So we were very careful not to have any little pieces of rock fly up to the windows.
Deva?
Yes?
Why did you choose to solarize this instead of sheet mulching?
Right, this is an embarrassing question. I won't repeat it. No,
sorry.
She said, why did you choose to solarize this instead of just sheet mulching? The clients wanted it, but partly it was a misdiagnosis. We actually were afraid that there was a lot of Bermuda in this, and we gave them an estimate for hauling it all off to the landfill, the fast technique for getting rid of Bermuda, but they decided to go with something different. And it was a successful project, so that's the long answer. So here it is, after we've weed whacked it, guess what? There's a ton of material there which will be making a blanket on the soil, so we actually hauled it off. Now this was a benefit to me because I got to use all this as compost. So I had a massive compost pile. And here are some other pictures of different techniques of this. You need to use clear plastic, and on your handout that I've given you, there are details of, much more details on soil solarization if you're interested. There's a website through the University of California which gives you all the details. And they recommend that you use a very thin millimeter of plastic because the thicker plastics actually protect the soil on some level from the solar gain. And so they suggest like, I think it's a 1 to 4 millimeter, very thin, almost like painter's tarp plastic, which is what I ended up using, painter's tarp. And you can bury the edges in soil. You can make a little trench around the edge and put the plastic in and cover it back up with dirt. You can use rocks. We ended up using a combination of staples and wood and pipes, and because, you know, 6,000, it was 6,000 square feet of plastic, a lot of plastic. So you can see this is a nice tidy, this is what we did, and actually after about a month, it was all dead. So, except for the areas where bushes overhung, there it was shaded and that part did not die. So we had to dig that out by hand. So any questions about soil solarization? I'm not going to talk too much more about that. Yes?
Why do you use clear? Why not use black?
Right. So clear, we use clear plastic instead of black plastic because we're trying to create something like the greenhouse effect where you just heat it up really hot. Black plastic isn't as effective for that. However, black plastic is more effective for blocking out the sun. So black plastic will work for keeping the plant from photosynthesizing. But since what we were trying to do is kill it fast, not just starve it of green, clear plastic is what you use. If you have a long time, you can use black plastic. Next question. What about tree roots? That's actually a good question. What about tree roots? So in general, the tree roots will not be killed, especially the larger roots, but little fibrous roots right near the surface would be killed if you had a tree that had very fibrous roots right near the surface. It probably wouldn't injure the tree seriously, I'm assuming, but it would have to be looked at a case-by-case basis. Okay, so I'm going to move on, because soil solarization is not my favorite technique, but I wanted to give you that as an option. Sometimes it may be better than the next technique I'm going to share it with you. So who here has heard of sheet mulching? Like everybody, right? So what I want to say is that sheet mulching, I've been doing that for, 20 or 30 years. I learned about it as a permaculture technique from the original permaculture enthusiasts and from Bill Mollison's book on permaculture, a book about permanent agriculture and a lot of natural processes, some of which we now use. And what happened was about 5 years ago, our company started a project we called Natural Front Yards. And we did this particularly because we noticed that there were a lot of people who wanted to have professional landscaping, but they couldn't afford it. And there were also a pretty significant subset of people who wanted to change out their lawns. Their heart was in the right place. They knew that lawns were using a lot of water, and they were, they took a lot of petroleum products to take care of and whatnot. And they wanted to do something different, but they really didn't know what, and they also didn't really want to learn themselves. So we came up with this project, which I am going to share all of our secrets, called Natural Front Yards, because it's a natural match for a homeowner to do. And here we go. So Natural Front Yards, we call it Natural Front Yards because usually in front yards there aren't a lot of uses for extra uses. It's mostly aesthetic. You want your front yard to look nice, but you don't hang out there too much. So our very first project was this one in South San Jose. And we didn't know exactly what we were doing, but we thought we had a good idea. And so what we did is we asked one of our employees who had just bought a house, and who, naturally, if you just bought a house, you have no money for landscaping, if she would like us to let her be the guinea pig for our first natural front yard. And so this was her house, and still is her house. And you can see that it has a lawn in the parking strip. It has, kind of a weedy lawn, and has some very uninspired foundation plantings, very typical kind of look, and one tree. And so This is what our natural front yard looked like about 18 months to 2 years afterwards. Now, I am going to share, at the end of my talk, I'm going to share some of my favorite plants because I can. And I wanted to just point out that this yard has several of them, and Peggy mentioned several of them too. So since I am on this slide, let me just share with you that real architectural grass-looking thing, I bet you all know what that one is, right? And you don't have to give me the Latin name. Deer grass. So that's deer grass. And I think Latin is very, very important when you're sourcing a plant. But for our purposes, we'll probably use common names. And then I also always have the botanical name. The big gray spreading thing in this plant, in these pictures, are a kind of ground cover sage called Bee's Bliss. Also one of my favorites. And behind the deer grass is a red blooming flower, and this is a California fuchsia, one of the low growing ones, epilobiums. And these three are some of my favorite go-to plants, and they are all plants that grow very well in this style of planting that I'm going to show you, the sheet mulching style. So first, I'm going to give you the list, and this is on your handout, so you don't have to write it down. This is the list of what we do, basically, and then I have pictures, so we'll go through this list quickly. First, you're going to remove anything you don't want, like any shrubs that you always wanted to get rid of, or they came with the house and you didn't like them. The demo is the first thing you do. So you're going to remove those shrubs. And also, if you're going to identify if there are plants that need a lot of water, would be a good time to think about, do you still want them there with these new drought-tolerant plants that you're going to put in? The second thing is you're going to abandon your sprinkler system on your lawn. One reason for this is that sprinklers use a lot of extra water compared to drip and waste, but the main reason is that you're going to be putting in plants, and those 4-inch pop-ups will be blocked by your plants, so it's not going to give you good coverage either. So you're going to unscrew all the heads, and you're going to just abandon the pipes underneath the surface. Then you can scalp the lawn, either with a weed whacker, or this might be the last time you use your lawnmower. Really put it on the lowest setting and see if you can do some damage. And then you're going to cut back the edges. This is, I think, really key. You're going to cut back the edges of your lawn near the hardscape about 4 inches deep, and I'll explain why and how. You're going to take that soil and mound it somewhere else. You're going to cover the whole thing with paper and then chips, wood chips. And then you're going to and you can do this the same day. You can plant right in the wood chips and then install drip lines, cover with a nice mulch, like maybe the frosting on your sheet layer cake. And then you're going to spray with compost tea to help bring back more of the life to the whole area. Now, I want to say that this technique does not work very well with Bermuda and oxalis. They both need different techniques. Who here, by show of hands, has Bermuda grass in their yard? Boy, that's a good survivor. Who has oxalis, the kind of Bermuda buttercup one? Okay, we could have a whole symposium on that, couldn't we? I will talk a little bit about those different things because we run into that all the time. So, organic Bermuda grass removal. First, our tradition, we have not used chemicals for all the time we've been in business. We have a dedication to not using Roundup and other kinds of toxic chemicals. So what we do is we substitute hand labor and other things, being smarter than the plant sometimes, and whatnot. So what we will do is we'll rent a sod cutter, and then we'll water it about 3 days before, because that makes the soil moist enough to be effective with the sod cutter. We'll make 2 passes with the sod cutter, and we actually haul that away to the landfill. That's kind of sad because you're removing all that topsoil, but like I said, we're landscapers and we're in a hurry. And we you know, but as a homeowner, you actually could cut that sod and remove it to a place and dry it out. If you could, you know, lay it, if it was the summer and you laid those Bermuda rhizomes and extra soil, say on a driveway or on asphalt or something, within a month, I would say it'd be completely dead and safe to use. You could sift it, put it back into planter boxes or a mound or something like that. That's what I meant by you have more time. Yes?
What if you bury it very deeply? How deep can they rise up if you bury it?
How deep can they rise up if you bury it? Well, you don't want to bury them while they're alive. You want to bury them, I mean, you're adding, you need to make sure they're dead first. And then they just become part of the solution.
10 feet deep.
You're saying that your Bermuda roots are 10 feet deep?
No, use it to fill in a bottom of the swimming pool.
Oh, can they come? Oh, interesting question. The question is, what if you use some of this soil to fill a swimming pool that has that's 10 foot deep? I'm pretty sure they can't make it to the top. Yeah. Yeah, she's crossing her fingers. No, I'm pretty sure. Bermuda has sort of a mystique and people think they can never get rid of it, but it's not true. I mean, you're the people, it's just a plant. You really can outthink it. So, what happens and why it has such a good reputation, a strong reputation, is that we're not paying attention. Day and night, it's just growing into our shrub beds. And we're not paying attention, and 6 months later we go, oh, but it didn't happen that fast. You know, it's because we weren't paying attention. Okay, so you remove most of the rhizomes, but there are a few, you know, that are deeper down into the subsurface. So then you're going to rototill it lightly and rake out any rhizomes by hand, and there will be a few that will still be there, but you can get 98% of it that way. And so then you go ahead and finish landscaping, and because the ground is now soft, because you are going to put a lot of mulch on top, it's easy to remove the few pieces of Bermuda grass that come back. And there will be a few, and you do have to be on top of it. So that's our organic technique for removing Bermuda. Yeah?
I was curious whether this will hold true for crabgrass too.
For crabgrass? Crabgrass, he's asking if it would be true for crabgrass also. Crabgrass, if I understand what you're thinking about, would be an annual grass. And it would be completely smothered by the technique we're using. Oops, come back. So as a result, you would definitely get rid of crabgrass. There are other invasive running grasses like St. Augustine kikiu and Johnson grass, and all those would respond to this technique. Now we're going to talk about Bermuda grass. And I didn't put Peggy on the spot because when she showed that thing, I wanted to kind of ask her, okay, what did you do? Because I haven't found any really good organic techniques for removing this particular plant in a landscape. I can tell you this, and this is probably the best information I have, is that you need to know that this is a Mediterranean plant from South Africa. It is a bulb, and that it has a life cycle that follows the seasons, our seasons. This is why it's so effective here. It's completely dormant at this time of year. You could go into a yard and not know it was there. It's just sitting waiting for the rains. It has little bulbs under the ground, and what will happen when it rains is they will sprout, and they'll go a long distance to reach the surface. And if you block them with, say, cardboard, they'll run around under the cardboard looking for that little place that you made a mistake and you left a little hole. And they'll come out of there. But this is the most effective technique. When they start to green up as soon as it rains, what it means is they're depleting the bulb to get to the surface so they can get sustenance from the sun and air and light. So you want to pull it as soon as you see it. Be on top of it in the fall, in the early winter, pull, pull, pull. Remove or smother, but make sure it doesn't get the light of day. And pulling it up repeatedly at that time of year will be your most effective way because you're weakening it. You're depleting the bulb. as a second part of that, if you wait until it blooms, it's already making new bulbs for next year. So you know that you have to do it before it blooms to be effective. So now you can use all your brains to figure out how to do that, and then let me know how that works, because I can't be at your house pulling. Yes?
On your handout, you also say chickens?
Chickens. Chickens do eat oxalis. I know because I have 60 chickens, and I have no oxalis left. They ate every bit of it. And that's because chickens are persistent and patient, just like we should be. What happens is as soon as they see it green in the spring, they're on it. And that's how I know it works. So there is no oxalis left at my house. Or anything else. So what I want to tell you is this is a wonderful little thing here. This is a chicken tractor. A chicken tractor is if you haven't heard of this before, a chicken tractor is a small portable chicken coop hutch that has no bottom. So you can keep, depending on how big it is, this one has 3 chickens in it. You can put this on the ground. The chickens will do the following. They will eat every green thing in there, and anything they don't like, they'll step on and scratch until it's dead. They will poop and fertilize the area, and they will eat every bug in the area, and then they'll lay an egg for you. I mean, how much better does it get? And then as soon as they've done that, and they've denuded that little square or rectangle, you just pick up the tractor and move it over to the next part of your lawn. I think it is a fabulous idea. I have 3 of them. So,
Do you
yes.
recommend a certain supplier, or do you make your own?
This particular chicken tractor was handmade. They have kits, and if you look on the web under chicken tractor, you will see a million designs. They're all different. Mine are all made out of recycled materials. The only real thing you have to worry about, I think, once you understand chicken behavior and whatnot, is making sure that it's safe from predators. Because chickens are very, everybody likes chicken. So this is I'm just waiting for someone to come up with a business where they remove lawns with chickens. Okay, so now I'm going to share with you, step by step, our natural front yard techniques for sheet mulching. And I'm open to questions, as I said.
Does goat work for removing that?
Goats do not work because goats are browsers. What they want to do is they want to eat your trees. Goats are not like sheep or chickens. They don't really eat grass. They come along and they strip your trees. Yeah. Introducing goats is a lot like introducing deer. I don't recommend it. I love goats, but I don't recommend it for lawns. Okay, so scalped lawn. This is a lawn that we have scalped with a weed whacker, and the idea here is to weaken the lawn, but also leave the material that you've cut off there to start to decompose. So a lawn that's weaker because you've just cut all of its ability to photosynthesize is going to be slower to, it's not going to be able to make it through the layers you're going to put on top of it. This is also, if you have heavy clay, this also might be a good time to add some powdered oyster shell. This is something you might use instead of, don't use gypsum, which doesn't work, although in common usage it's always been said to break up clay. But powdered oyster shell would be a better choice, and you can get that at Lingso Garden Materials in Redwood City. Okay, so here's the part where you're going to cut back the edges of the soil next to your hardscape. The reason you do this is because we are going to add at least 4 inches of wood chips. Now, the lawn is probably above the hardscape already, right? Because it's been growing all this time. Or even if it's at the same grade level, it is going to need you, if you put wood chips on top of it, they'll just fall on your sidewalk. They'll just fall on your patio. So anywhere you have hardscape, like sidewalk or patio, there has to be a drop, a depth of about 4 inches at the edge. So this is labor. So you're going to cut that back with a pick and a shovel, and you're going to move that somewhere. And you go back about 12 to 18 inches and just taper it back up to the lawn. Is that clear? Do you have a visual of what that? So here's another picture where you can see it happening. They've cut it back. We've cut it back. No, he cut it back. I didn't do it. Cut back the soil. And you can see what we did with the soil. It's right behind the wheelbarrow in the picture, making a mound. And that's just on top of the grass. So you can see that. You can see that. And that way you can keep the soil on your site. You can do something else with it if you don't want a mound. You can put it somewhere else in your property. You can mix it with compost to make a nice raised bed. But it always is kind of nice to, you have the soil there, just use it to make a mound. Here's an example of some nice natural looking mounds, and I want to make a big pitch for natural looking mounds because I do not want to see a big square or rectangular mound that looks like somebody just buried a horse in the top of the lawn. So make it look, taper it down to the lawn, make one end a little higher, give it a little curve, make it a little kidney shape, play with it. And then in this case, we also added some boulders set into the edge of the mound. And you can see that these boulders were purchased at a rockery because they still have their little pink tags on them. And then they were delivered there. And we just, are going to roll them into place and tuck them into the mound so it looks really like it was always there. So this will add a lot of lovely structure to your front yard or your backyard, wherever you're doing. There's nothing quite like a boulder, in my opinion. I'll just say that the least expensive boulders around here, or very commonly available ones, are Sonoma fieldstone or Napa fieldstone, also sometimes called mossy rock, because they're relatively locally mined, taken out of fields that are now being turned into suburbs. And we also have some quarry stone that is from the Stevens Creek quarry, which is not as pretty, but much cheaper. They're just trying to get it out and make gravel out of it. So then after you have these mounds, and you can see that there's grass still in the right-hand side of the picture, we're going to cover the whole thing with paper. Now you can use newspaper, and if you use newspaper, use 5 layers of overlapping newspaper. And you can use all parts of the paper except I wouldn't use the shiny glossy Sunday supplement paper. That's a clay-based paper, and it uses a different kind of technique and ink. You can use colored papers like the Sunday comics are fine. They all break down just fine. But what we're doing is we're trying to smother the annual. We want to make a barrier so the grass can't get through, and any annual weed seeds will not sprout.
Is there any reason you're not using cardboard?
Oh, you can use, she's asking, is there any reason we're not using cardboard? No, you can certainly use cardboard. I have used plenty of cardboard as well as newspapers, this is builder's paper in this case. Now we found that builder's paper works really well because it's a continuous roll, and we use 2 layers. In this case, you can see that we're stapling it down with the 6-inch landscape staples, and right over the mound. But we've used newspapers, cardboard, builder's paper. We use whatever there is available and whatever works. Okay? With the cardboard, if you're saving cardboard to do this sheet mulching, I know this seems odd, but cardboard actually breaks down faster than newspapers in irrigated areas for sure, but even unirrigated areas. And I did a study. I did them side by side, and I saw the cardboard disappeared first. And you wouldn't think so. You'd think, oh, that's thicker. But remember, corrugated cardboard has a lot of air spaces inside, and those are sites for decomposition. And that's what happens. It decomposes pretty fast. And then what are you left with? Plastic tape that you didn't take off the cardboard. We have a client who just covered their whole lawn with cardboard, covered it up with free arbor chips from an arborist, and then called us a year later, and there was nothing left, really, a few arbor chips and plastic tape. So our job was mostly just pull the tape up. Questions about smothering at this level, this first layer of sheet composting.
How much do you overlap the sheets?
Yes, how much do you overlap the sheets? So with newspapers, it doesn't really matter as long as they are overlapped, and if you have plenty of newspapers, overlap plenty, by a third, when we do these, we overlap enough to have 2 layers in all places. So we're doubling. Yes?
You had on the handout, scalping the lawn is optional.
Yes.
So if it's not scalped, would you then smother more?
That's a good question. Because I said scalping the lawn is optional, because I've done it without scalping it, would you just add more layers and make it thicker so that the grass didn't come through? Yeah, just make it thicker. That's fine. Yes?
Maybe you talked about this, but why wouldn't you use wheat cloth?
Oh, why don't you use weed cloth instead of paper? First of all, we're really looking to create a nice environment that is all going to be decomposed in a very natural environment. Weed cloth isn't going to break down, and it will be a barrier for a number of things, but basically what happens with weed cloth, and maybe you have had this experience, you put all this mulch on top of it, and now you have all this compost on top of the weed cloth. It doesn't really make sense. So it keeps things from growing, it keeps the things you want from growing through it. Also, if it was weed cloth, you'd have to cut a hole in it for every plant. With this technique, the plants do the work. You don't have to cut a hole in it. Now, did that answer your question enough, or do you have a comment you want to add to it? Maybe I didn't say everything. Okay.
Jeff Caldwell always adds also how with weed barrier, it makes it less hospitable to a lot of the animals that we like, that we see,
Yeah.
like newts and things like that.
What she's saying is that weed cloth, that Jeff Caldwell adds, that weed cloth is not that environmentally friendly to the animals that we want to encourage, like newts and things like that. Okay, so what goes on top of the paper? The mulch, the wood chips that I said. And you can use any kind of mulch. Our conference today is partially sponsored by Zanker Products, and so they bring you mulch in. It's usually made of chipped up pellets that is dyed a different color, one color or another. You can certainly use this, or you could use that just as the top dressing. But underneath, this is my favorite kind of mulch, is free mulch. The one you don't have to pay for and they deliver it to. And so what we are getting here, I'm calling this arbor chips, but this is just the byproduct of urban tree cutting. So whenever someone has to cut a tree, or arborists will come and they will chip it up so that it doesn't cost them so much when they take it to the landfill, because it doesn't take so much room. If you're nice to them, and your space is not difficult to access, they will deliver it to your house and put it in your driveway instead of taking it to the dump. A win-win situation all around. They won't charge you for it. And so it's a little problematic to get that, in that you have to wait for them. You don't know exactly when, and you don't know what kind of chips they're going to bring you or how much. So you have to work with them on that. But if you are flexible around that, and you say something like, "Hi, my name's Deva, I live in San Jose, East San Jose in this area, and I'm looking for 1 load of clean arbor chips. When you're in my area, can you give me a call and tell me that you're coming?" And then you give them your phone number. You call a few people, and you'll find someone you can connect with. Yes?
Should you be concerned at all that, you're going to get the dumpings from somebody's sudden oak death tree?
Mm-hmm. So the question is, should you be concerned at all about disease, or especially sudden oak death on oaks? So I actually think that, I'll start by saying that I've had hundreds of loads delivered over a long time, and I've not really had any problems at all. And I'll give you a couple of things to watch for. Who here has an oak tree? Great. I think I would ask, if I had an oak tree and I was going to put the chippings on my property, I would ask them, the arborist, is this coming from an oak tree that had any possibility of disease? Usually it's not oak, but if it is oak, I would decline it. Why not? Be careful.
And what about bay trees?
Bay trees as a host is a possibility also. You don't actually see too many chipped bay trees. It's usually it's usually other kind of trees in the urban environment. Pines are fine and whatnot. But I have not had any problem at all. And I do have some oak trees. But I haven't had any problem of that nature. Yes?
I'd like to add something to what you're saying.
Yes, please.
It's best for you to be present when they bring the load. I've had good loads, I had really bad loads, and I had somebody drop 3 loads instead of 1.
Oh. Okay, so in case you didn't hear that, he says, in his experience, it's good to be present because he's had somebody dump 3 loads instead of 1. And also, some of the loads are variable. So they're different qualities. Yes?
I just want to mention something, because I had our trees trimmed just recently, and so we got our chips, and we got whatever was left in their truck. And that had been in there for a while, it's already started to decompose, and it had mold and mildew. I got very sick. So people need to be aware that if there's any mold sensitivities, they need to have protection and all of this.
Thank you. That's a good point. So what she said is she got a load of her own chips, but she also had the arborist dump what was already in the truck, and it had been in there long enough to develop molds and some spores and whatnot. And so she got sick, and what you want to do is you want to protect yourself from the decomposing. Like if your pile's going to sit for a long time, it will, well, even a short time, it will start to develop, it will heat up, especially if it's very green inside there. And so it will get the ashy, dusty effect on the inside of the pile. Not on the outside, but on the inside from the decomposition. So you want to wear a mask and be careful of that. Yes?
Would you recommend putting the sheet mulching under oak trees or not under oak trees?
Oh, I do recommend sheet mulching under oak trees. The reason is that so many people who have oak trees and they have gardeners, they've been blowing all the leaves off. What your oak trees really want is their own leaves laying on the ground right underneath them. That's what they want. That's why they're dropping the leaves there, because all the mycorrhizae that benefit that oak are living right under that mulch. So you do want mulch around your oak trees, even sheet mulching if that's, But if you already have the leaves, you don't need sheet mulch. You won't have lawn there. Yes?
What characterizes a good load?
Oh, a good load. What characterizes a good load? So they're mostly all good. I'll just say I don't really like palm because it's very fibrous. A good load, it could be very green and have a lot of leaves. It just means that will decompose faster and you'll get more compost sooner. If it's very barky and has a lot of wood chips, it's mostly from the trunk and branches, that will last longer. I can say that if their blades are very sharp, it'll be in small pieces, and if it's not, they'll be in bigger pieces. Yes?
What about seeds?
And seeds. See, I knew this was going to be a good discussion. So you can imagine that certain trees have seeds, and they could be chipped. For instance, just imagine that somebody was chipping a privet at the time that the seeds were ripening. So this is actually in my yard. I've only had a problem with it twice in hundreds of yards. Hundreds of years. I'm really not that old. But the seeds did one season. They spread. I think it was ash that had a lot of seeds, and I came out there because it rained, and my gosh, there were thousands of seedlings. And it really scared me, and I thought, oh, I can never pull all these seedlings. But it actually didn't turn out to be a problem. As soon as it became, it became dry in the spring, they all died. So they couldn't make it through all that mulch because it was 6 inches of mulch. They just couldn't make it through. So they just naturally died and became part of the solution again. So I haven't had any trouble with that. All right, so I'll take a couple more questions about mulch and maybe we'll continue that. Yes?
I was just going to say, when you request clean mulch from an arborist, I thought that meant no seeds.
No, clean mulch doesn't mean no seeds.
Okay, what does that mean?
It probably means no soda cans.
No soda.
No, clean mulch. You know?
Disease. No disease.
No disease.
Ah, got it.
Thank you. Maybe we should actually make sure we're all on the same page when we're talking to our arborists. Yeah. Question?
Do you ever have problems with bamboo, chipped bamboo?
Chip bamboo, I've never seen anybody chip bamboo.
Well, after one of your
Yeah.
last
Yeah.
sessions I attended, I was so excited when I opened
Yes.
and I got a load from a tree service friend. He said, oh, and by the way, there's a little bamboo in there. And
Uh-huh.
it kind of created all these cross fibers across the whole
So it
layer
was
of it.
very fibrous.
Yeah, and then you'd have to pull it out.
And it was
would go
difficult to
feet
deal with.
Long and
Okay. I don't really like palm or bamboo. I really appreciate you bringing that up. I've never had bamboo be a problem, but I could see any kind of grassy plant like that could be a problem. So, yeah, because what we're really looking for is something like this. So this is the load that they dumped that day, and I'm showing you a close-up. I would call this very barky. It has some longer pieces, but it doesn't matter because it's all going to be hidden. And so even if it's a very rough looking load, which I would call not such a good load, because it has pine cones in it, and it has branches that are 6 to 12 inches long mixed in it, and things like that, like this one has a bit of that. It's all going to be okay because it's all going to decompose, and it's going to be covered. Now in this case, I want to tell you one thing you want to be careful for. I love this slide because we spread all the mulch out, but you can see a tree trunk here. You do not want to put any mulch next to your tree trunk or your woody shrubs. You want to pull it back 6 to 12 inches and then just taper it in so it doesn't hold moisture next to the trunk. What will happen, what can definitely be a problem, is crown rot, and you can kill a tree that way by having either soil or mulch or anything moist, even a lot of anything, up next to the crown. So you want to protect that crown and leave that dry and exposed to the air. Questions about that? Okay. So the next thing you're going to do after you have all this mulch, and it's going to be at least 4 inches, I would say 4 inches of mulch, tapered down at the corners, but 4 inches of mulch, and right over your mound, over your, over all the paper. And you can use more if you have it. You can make it thicker. You're going to set out the plants. And the plants, you want to not put them too close together. You want to know how big those plants are going to grow, how wide they're going to grow, because if you overplant and you plant them too close together, you are setting yourself for years of maintenance problems and a lot of yard waste that you have to haul off to the curb or dump or something like that, or compost. You really want to make sure your spacing is good. This is a good time to also put in boulders, to put in driftwood, to know where a bench is going to go, stepping stones, that kind of thing. So you're going to space the plants for their ultimate growth. You want to know how big they're going to grow. Yeah?
You put the stepping stones in first?
So the question is, do you put the stepping stones in first? If you're going to have 4 inches of mulch, it depends what you're going to use for a path. Generally, you would do all your hardscape first. If you are doing bricks, concrete, pavers, do that first and make sure they just put it in at a grade that works, with everything else. And then you're going to treat it just as if it was a sidewalk, and you're going to have the edges cut away. If you're adding stepping stones, it depends on how thick they are. You may want to go right to the ground or put some leveling sand or something underneath it, but you don't want your stepping stones to be sunk down below the level of mulch. So you want them to be steady. So usually you would put them first, but you have to get them onto firm ground. Make sense? Okay. Here you can also see in this picture, and this is just the free mulch that these plants are going to go into. You can also see the beginnings of our irrigation system. All right, so now we're going to plant in a pocket of mulch. This is the part that defies belief. They're like, you're not going to dig into the soil, you're not going to cut into the paper, you're just going to take your hands and shove the mulch away and expose a little circle about this big down to the paper. And then you're going to put in a bucket of either good compost, or it could be good soil mixed with good compost, something like that. And you're going to plant right in that on top of the paper. This works very well for 4-inch plants. And in case no one has mentioned this to you ever before, in general with native plants, it's good to use them small because they will catch up to the bigger sizes in the nursery anyway. It gives their roots a chance. You should look for vigorously growing plants, plants that are not root bound. If they are root bound, you definitely need to cut the roots and break up the root ball enough to where it gets out into the soil and into the mulch. The plants are going to do all the work of getting through the paper. They'll be through very quickly, I can assure you. Even cardboard, they'll go through that cardboard pretty fast because it's going to be wet there and it's going to decompose. So this planting technique in a pocket in the mulch is very important if you're, for this technique. It also saves you a lot of time and effort. Do you know how fast this is compared to digging a hole? Really easy. So a few more techniques about this planting business. So right next to his right knee, you see a little bag, plastic bag with a brown label on it. This is mycorrhizae. Mycorrhizae is, well, I'll tell you that this little bag costs about $8, I think. And I bought it at Capital Wholesale Nursery, and all that's written down on your handout. And this, you can get it at different places, but mycorrhizae, what it is it's what we're going to use instead of fertilizer. It's living spores of beneficial fungi. The kind of fungi, and they have many species in this bag, that are associated with native plants and other woody shrubs and trees. And these have such a long association with these plants. What they do is they help the plants capture or utilize the nutrients that are in our clay soils and in our other soils. They help the plants in a lot of ways. They protect against disease. They help them take up nutrients. I mean, how is it that a giant forest, a beautiful giant, mature forest, doesn't get fertilizer? It's not only because of all the leaf litter that is allowed to stay on the soil, but it's also because of the beneficial mycorrhizae in the soil. Now, your soils already have beneficial mycorrhizae, but if you have a lawn that's been watered, it has been sprayed, it has had fertilizers that are 20-0-0 put on them, this is soil that has been very damaged and doesn't have much life left in it. So we want to bring the life back to this soil. When I went to college, I went to UC Davis, and no one ever mentioned, I don't think they knew about the soil food web back then. And this is an emerging science, and this is really critical. They went in this whole, let's fertilize heavily and create agriculture, but there are other ways to do it, and I just want to share them with you. And so using the mycorrhizae is one of them. So here he is planting in these planting pockets. Yes?
What form does it come in and where do you get it?
Sure. You can get it at any good nursery. What form does it come in? It can be a liquid. It can be a wettable liquid. It's usually, this is a powder. So this is a powder, and every bag has like a bazillion of these mycorrhizae spores. You don't even, a teaspoon has a bazillion. But what you're going to do is they're dormant. And so you're going to add them to the roots of your plant. They have to be sprinkled on the roots of your plant, or right in that, they have to be next to the roots. When the roots start growing and when you water the plant, which you're going to do right away, it will wake up those spores. If they're not next to the roots, they won't be able to get over to the roots. It takes them a while to, grow. So you want it to be right on the roots. And so mycorrhizae you can buy and there are different brands and different types. You can buy them at different good nurseries.
What about vermicompost as a substitute?
Vermicompost as a substitute? So vermicompost is a lovely thing, and I use worm composting all the time. It's not the same thing. Mycorrhizae, and good worm compost might have some in it. I don't know. You have on your handout, there are some examples. I think it's the last one. I talk a little bit about soil testing in your handout. And one of the things is there are places you can buy, not just the mycorrhizae, but you can buy the mycorrhizae alive in an alive form that's ready to go, and that's called compost tea. So I would use that instead. I think you could add vermicompost. If you're adding that, you're definitely adding good things to your soil. Add the worms too. Okay, let's see what else is in this.
I also wanted to ask about the size of the pots. I was told by a nursery that they always recommend 1 gallon no matter what the plant, because you reduce the odds of a plant not growing or not.
Okay, so your nursery, she said, I was always told by a nurseryman to always plant 1 gallons because it would reduce the failure rate,
Yes.
as opposed to using 5 or 15 gallons, or as opposed to using 2-inch or 4-inch.
Yes.
Well, I would say they're upselling. You can use 4-inch pots. You can use 1 gallons. I mean, I've used them all. Yesterday we planted a 36-inch box tree. I mean, we use them all. They all will require paying attention to. So I think that what the nurseryman is responding to is that so many people don't pay attention to a 4-inch pot is going to dry out fast. And so they're worried about that. And so they see a lot of failure with that. But in this technique, you're going to irrigate right away because this is an important piece. You're buying nursery plants. They're not grown in soil. They're grown in some kind of soil-less mix, which is nice and light and fluffy and has good drainage, and they know what, and that's what works, and they're watering every day in those pots. So obviously there's going to be a time period when you have to get your plants used to your native soil, which is not the same kind of soil. So you have to irrigate it first, you have to pay attention to them, and you want to get their roots out into that native soil. Yeah?
So are these pockets that you're planting in, is that native soil or is that?
No, she's asking if the pockets we're using is native soil. No, you can use that, but we are using compost and as a transition to go out into the rest. Yeah. How do you get a 1-gallon pot into 4 inches of compost, into 4 inches of mulch? You were wondering that, weren't you? Yeah. Sort of brutally. So you kind of have to break up the bottom of the root ball like this and kind of squish it down flat, and you're kind of scuffing up that root ball and opening up the 1 gallon so that it's kind of squished down flat. You're still planting a little high because you still have 1 more inch of mulch that is coming besides this mulch. Yes?
The whole process of stuffing and opening up the root balls, there's a lot of people who say that you shouldn't bother the roots on native plants. Can you address that from your experience?
So there are some people who say you shouldn't bother the roots on native plants. There are plants that do not like their root balls scuffed. For instance, and this is a non-native bougainvillea, very touchy about their roots. If you notice in the root ball that the roots are just starting to touch the edge of the root ball, don't mess with it. It's fine. You're really talking about plants that might have girdling roots, that have matted roots. You're thinking about, is the water going to get from where it's coming in the drip irrigation system to that root ball? And are the plant roots going to be getting out? If there's an interface, that's a strong interface between potting soil and clay soil, the clay soil will stay wet and the potting soil will stay completely dry, which is why a lot of that, plants have a failure. You have to kind of get it out in, and that's why we're surrounding it with some compost. Okay, so here's the drip irrigation system. Once the plants are planted in these planting pockets, we're going to snake a 1/2-inch tubing around your yard. This is going to come directly from the valve. Remember, we capped off the irrigation system that was there. It's still underground, but we're going to just abandon it. But we're going to go back to the original valve where you have the water coming, from the house, and that's controlled by the controller. And we're going to add two things to that valve to make it work for our drip system. One is a filter, and one is a pressure reducer. And you can even buy these now as a little package together. But you need to have the pressure reducer so you don't blow all your fittings, and you need to have the filter so that you don't clog any of the emitters. But I will show you exactly what kind of system we're using now in this technique. There's lots, and you're going to hear more about irrigation, but I want to show you ours. So this is from that 1/2-inch tube that's snaked around your yard. We're going to use a little barb and put one of these 1/4-inch, what we also call spaghetti tubes, right into it, and then make that spaghetti tube go to the plant. The black part there is the spaghetti tube. It has no holes in it, and it is connected with another little barb. It's just like Tinker Toys, to this little brown tubing, which is an inline drip tubing. Every 6 or 12 inches, it has an inline enclosed emitter. And that comes in rolls, like 50 and 100-foot rolls, and you just cut it with pruning shears, and you stick the barb, and you stick it together, and you put a little plug on the end. Okay, that can't be. Don't I have till 11:45?
Yes, you do.
And is it, you're saying 1 minute?
No, it should be 20 minutes still.
You gave me the wrong one. Okay, thank you. That was
Oh, I'm sorry.
big panic for
Sorry.
me. Okay. I'm going to have to talk really fast. All right, so we're going to put a little cap on the end of this brown tubing, and we're going to use one of those 6-inch staples to make a little spiral around the plant, and you have to have this water next to the plant. That's where its roots are now. So all the area of mulch isn't going to be irrigated, just this area. This enables you to make an expansion later, so you can make it bigger and pull that away from the plant so it's not close to the trunk, and also maybe cap it off later. So, or even add extra irrigation to it. So this is a very flexible system. It's all going to be hidden by the mulch because the next top layer of 1-inch mulch, the decorative mulch, is going to be covering it. So I talked about compost tea a little bit, what it does for you, and right after you do the planting, that's a good time to spray everything. You want to improve the life in the soil, and all the things you're doing, the paper, the dead lawn, the mulch, the compost, everything is going to add to the vibrancy and life of your soil, which will support your beautiful garden. I grew my own. You can get this. This KIS means Keep It Simple. It's a brand. They send you a 5-gallon bucket, the little motor, and it just, and those little packages are actually the compost and the compost, some good compost and some compost foods for the mycorrhizae and beneficial bacteria, and you brew it up in a actively aerobic capacity, and then you spray it or pour it on your yard. You can spray it on the leaves of things that get mildew to protect them from mildew. This is a really cool thing. But if you don't want to invest in this system, because I think this costs like $120 for the setup. If you don't want to invest in the system, you can also buy it by the gallon from a number of places. Make sure it's live. It has to be sprayed right after you buy it, within 4 hours, or it starts to, they start to decline. And I have information on your handout about where to get it. So here's an example of the rough grading for a dry creek, in case you're interested in doing something like this. You want to make it below the surface of the ground. In this picture, you can see the newspapers underneath the mulch, right? And you can see that we've laid the lines for irrigation on top, and we're starting to push them into the mulch to hide them. We have not yet planted or put the little spaghetti tubes to the plants. But this dry creek, you are going to grade this out before you put the newspaper down or anything else, and you're going to mound up the sides to increase the effect that you are actually have a little creek bed. And you need to, there's a whole science to adding boulders and rocks and pebbles, which is a big art form. This is what the dry creek looked like right after planting. and putting together, and now we've put the decorative 1-inch layer of mulch, purchase mulch, on top of everything else. We're using 2 colors of mulch here to define a path in one area and just to add a little more interest in another area. As soon as right before you plant and right after you plant, water the plants. So you're watering them in the pot so that they are starting out moistened, and then water them after they're completely planted. You can see sort of dark spaces around each one of these plants. It's because they've been hand watered. Even though they have drip irrigation, hand water everything you plant. Water it as soon as you plant it. If nothing else, it blocks out, it gets rid of the air pockets, and you want to make sure to do that. So, any questions about this? Yes?
Does the fine purchase mulch ever wiggle its way down into the...
That's a good question. Does the fine purchase mulch ever disappear into the other rougher mulch? A little bit, but not much. I wouldn't, maybe it's because we don't use the mini mulch. That mini mulch, which is only a 1/4 inch mulch, isn't really all that appropriate for this because it probably would disappear. Plus, it floats away, it blows away. We go for wood chips a little bit coarser. Yes.
What's the water volume per plant of that tubing?
What's the water volume per plant?
Of the tubing.
On the tubing, yes. That particular tubing is, each emitter has, I believe, 1/2 gallon per hour. So if you are using 4 emitters on a little spiral, so that would end up being 2 gallons per hour. And if you use 6, it'd be 2.5 or 3 gallons per hour. Okay? And so that's the system we're using. On that system, you want to make sure, did I say don't make it a closed system? Leave it an open spiral, but with an end cap. This was actually only 11 months after planting. I went back and I just went, oh my gosh. So that's Verbena lilacina, the Cedros Island verbena, mixed with California fescue and Pink Island formiero, and a couple of non-natives on the left. Just spectacular growth in less than a year. Yes?
If your yard has steep slope,
very steep slope.
how do you keep it mulched?
That's a really good question. If you have a very steep slope, this technique probably won't work very well. You could consider terracing, creating swales. There is one thing we use on steep slopes, and I'll just describe it briefly. We use the kind of mulch called gorilla hair. It's redwood fiber because it doesn't slide and it mats. And it's not my favorite, but that is the one time we would use it, is on a steep slope. We would put a couple inches of, we'd put a layer of the redwood fiber, the gorilla hair, then we'd put down burlap and use staples to hold it in place. And then we would put another, say 2 inches of redwood fiber on top of that to cover the burlap, and that layering effect will work on a hill. When you want to plant in that, you actually have to cut a hole through the burlap. Yes?
I've always heard to keep mulch away from plants in the winter to keep down rotting, and particularly in plants that are in at least partial shade. How does that work?
She's asking about how far away do you have to keep the mulch away from the crown of plants. It isn't so critical in most plants except for woody trees and shrubs. So things like manzanitas, things that are going to be larger and have a big trunk, I don't worry about it too much on perennials, but on those I do keep it away from the trunk 6 inches a minimum. So there's some airspace. I want to show you a couple pictures. So here's a before picture. I love these before pictures. Of a yard that we just did a couple of years ago. And it didn't even have a lawn, but we had to, but you can see that it could use some help. And so we removed the gravel and the little gate and stuff. And after long discussions, we actually got them to get rid of these prune juniper trees, the umbrella trees. And within only 6 months, it looked like this. So it was a really, we're already starting to transform the soil underneath and the landscape. This one was a yard actually very heavily infested with Bermuda grass, and we had to remove the Bermuda grass. So you can see that this style, and they wanted 2 trees planted, an olive and an avocado. And all the rest are natives with the exception of, I think I put in 3 purple New Zealand flax because they use similar water, but they have a nice dark color, which I haven't found any natives that really have a dark color like that except for poison oak, and I haven't found anyone who will take that. So this is what it looked like 2 years later. So you can see that this can be very, very effective, a style. Right here, and I apologize for the color on this, but right here, this is monkey flowers. Sometimes notoriously picky about how they grow, and they're huge. And this is California fuchsia mixed with heterotheca, which is the, what's the common name?
Dwarf woolly daisy.
Woolly aster, woolly daisy. And this bright green is dwarf coyote bush in here, and this is the salvia bee's bliss, and this is the neighbor's yard. That's a bougainvillea next door. And here's another picture of the same yard from another direction with one of my favorite plants that is St. Catherine's lace, that really big, lovely buckwheat. And you can see the other things in there.
And they're selling that out.
And they're selling it out there, which I couldn't find it anywhere else, so that's good. Yes?
You have to tell them what time of year you took the picture.
Oh, yeah. So I took this picture, in late summer. You can see that the California fuchsia is blooming. Here is, you can see that California fuchsia is blooming. The monkey flowers are kind of finished. But this is late summer. Oh, here's another thing in this picture. I'll go back one, when they first planted it. You see, you go back in time, you go, oh my God, I have so much mulch in my yard. Look over in the corner there, underneath the window, in the crook by the garage. I planted a 1-gallon toyon.
Wow.
See it? That's a 1-gallon toyon 2 years later. So here's another example of a yard. In the inset picture, you can see what it used to look like. It was all lawns and very formal yews and boxwood hedges and whatnot. And actually, the yard looked very small and cramped for a large yard. And then luckily they had a lot of boulders and driftwood and whatnot. And we planted it, and this is what it looks like now, actually. So it's a very diverse yard filled with a lot of life and habitat and interest, and really fulfills the kind of things that we're looking for. So I wanted to give you a couple of my favorite plants.
Quick question.
Yes?
About, installation, you noted October, November.
Yeah.
New planting.
Oh, installation timing. You're just hitting a good time right now because, as everyone will tell you, the best time is when it gets cooler and it's just about to rain. Fall is the best time for installation, but as a landscaper, we keep our crews running year-round and we plant all year long. We have more plant losses in the summer and we just replace them. We just make it work. And you have to water more to get them established. And in the winter, we try hard to only do hardscape and things and not really muck around in the soil when it's muddy, you know. But other than that, the best time is fall. So here are a few. A dramatic accent grass, deer grass. A dry shade combination. If you have oaks and you want something underneath your dry shade. These are the Douglas iris and alum root, island alum root, which is Euchera maxima. They both bloom at the same time in the spring, not for very long, but then they have interesting leaf patterns that, that really contrast well for the rest of the year. This is an idea for a trellis. A lot of people want to cover a screen of fence, or put a trellis up or something, and then they plant a wisteria on it. And they're doomed to a life of maintenance. So trying to find a small, reasonably sized plant for a trellis, and this would be a great one. Catalina perfume, the Ribes viburnifolium, has a nice fragrance, a pretty leaf, doesn't get more than 6 feet tall. It's perfect for a little trellis. and likes a little, it likes a little shade, but some sun. So morning sun would be great. Yes, Chris? That's morning sun in that. And then there's a little carpenteria in the corner there. But if you have a sunny space and you want to put up a trellis, try this one. Because it's very adaptable, try Ceanothus Yankee Point. That could be pruned up on a trellis very nicely in sun. Tall bushy screening. So often, here are my favorite go-to plants for tall bushy screening, so that it's done a very nice job covering up this fence, and now it's working on covering up the neighbor's house. So toyons and wax myrtles.
How much shade can the
Myrica can't take quite, I don't think the wax myrtle can't take as much shade as the toyons can, but I have seen it as an understory plant. So I will grow it as an understory if it's not too shady. A reliable, evergreen, low-growing ground cover. I like Manzanita Carmel Sur. Better than emerald carpet, which needs weekly watering. It's very garden-worthy. This one, it's dense and low green. I don't think it actually flowers, but it's the one I'm using now. Here, for maybe a 2-foot high tall ground cover, use this coffee berry. This is the lowest of the coffee berries. It makes a really neat evergreen with berries, good for habitat kind of ground cover. And you can keep it easily to 2 feet. I'll just snip off a little bit of the top. It wants to be about 3, but it will make a good 2-foot high ground cover. My favorite go-tos, people ask me, and I've been thinking about what plants use no water once established, because as Peggy said, you really do, a lot of these, you need to keep some summer water on them a little bit. Buckwheats, some of the wonderful varieties of buckwheats. Great for habitat plants and beautiful in late summer. Just really a cool looking plant. Sages. So the different kinds of sages, some are big like Clevelandia, could be 5 or bigger feet tall and wide. The Salvia Spathacea, which is adaptable to dry shade as well as sun, and they all have wonderful fragrance. Just all these different sages, I love them. I want to make a plug for the Cedrus Island Verbena, which blooms for 6 months. I mean, it's just amazing how much bloom you get out of this. You do need to cut it back once a year or so, but it is a really good bloomer. And California fuchsia, blooming when hardly anything else is blooming in the late fall. And that's great for hummingbirds, and just a really cheery piece of color. And try and get the low forms. I'm not a big fan of the ones that are kind of tall and rangy. I've had some 6 feet tall and 4 feet tall, but these dense ones I think are very pretty in the garden. And this is an example of a yard that has many of the things I like. And the one thing about this I wish we had done differently is that's a Manzanita emerald carpet in there that's not spreading. And so I wish I'd used Carmel Sur instead. So this also has a redbud in it, and Ceanothus and Carpenteria, but this is a picture also in the late fall when, it's looking really good in late fall. And this was taken like in September, so like about now. So there are some extra resources for you, and I'm done. What are we doing on time? 1 minute. Question.
For me?
Yeah, you.
I have lots of oaks, and it's very shady except in the winter when the sun is low.
Yeah.
What can I put under?
Okay, so a list of things that you could put under oaks where it's very shady would be the things that I mentioned already, including the Douglas iris, the Ribes viburnifolium will grow under there.
Even with like no...
If it's really, really dark,
Yeah.
you can try things that grow naturally under oaks like that, like the California strawberry and Yerba Buena, or you could just give up. Just let it be mulch. If it's that dark, put a bench there and don't do anything. All right, so thank you very much. Oh, we have another question? Well, one more, okay.
Just if you could comment quickly on this mulching with the dry creek, how that would fit in with the rain garden.
Oh, how would mulching in a dry creek fit in with a rain garden? Make sure that if you want to, you can divert your downspouts underground over to the dry creek so that you get, that would be where all your water would go. And you can plant right in. You can plant right in it. You just, you have to use plants that will take drought and water. And that would be things like juncus, rushes. Yeah. Oh, thank you very much for coming.